Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new edition of India's World with me, Frank Rausen Pereira, and it's good to be back after being on the campaign trail in South India. Now, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party won 36 seats and surpassed the main rival, the Blue and White Party, in the 2019 Israel election. The results were released by the Central Election Committee on Thursday night after 2 days of counting ballots and delays caused by computer malfunctions. Netanyahu's right-wing Likud party won 36 seats, while the centrist Blue and White, led by an ex-army chief, gained 35 seats. Netanyahu now needs to form a governing coalition with at least 61 members in Israel's 120-seat parliament. He already said he intends to build a coalition with right-wing and ultra-Orthodox parties. His likely partners include Shas with 8 seats, the United Torah Judaism with 7 seats, both Jewish ultra-Orthodox parties. Now, on this edition of India's World, we will analyze the election results in Israel and what it means for Indo-Israel ties. Joining me on the program today are Shashank, former Foreign Secretary, Professor Swaran Singh, School of International Studies, JNU, and Harshvi Pant, Head Strategic Studies, Observer Research Foundation. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you. First, let's try and analyze and put into perspective the election results in Israel.
Well, it's like always that the election results are always split in Israel. Never in the past a single party has won the elections on its own. Now, somehow the climate there right now is on the right wing and on pacifying the settlers who have made homes on the West Bank, on the Gaza Strip, in the everywhere. So, so point is that before the elections, we find that the Netanyahu's party, of course, and the other right-wing parties are trying to give more and more concessions to the settlers. And secondly, they were getting great amount of support from the American leadership. And so therefore, they have taken advantage of these elements on one side. And the other side is that the Palestinians do not have the full support at this stage of all the Arab countries, because the Arab countries are having their own differences because of the various things which are going on in the Middle East. So therefore, this is the result as it has come out. It is likely that the right-wing parties will all get together. They will form a firm coalition, and this coalition will lead the country. But whether it will be a long-lasting coalition or not, that we'll have to see, and I'm quite sure that we'll be able to analyze that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Professor, how do you look at things as they stand right now? What happens to the two-state solution?
As you said, right now the tilt is towards not just ultra-right but orthodox right as well. So that's one, that the whole mood is in that direction. In terms of two states, I think we can see that there is also a kind of a disjointed kind of a picture on the Palestinian side. The Palestinian Liberation Organization versus the Palestinian Authority, then Hamas is controlling. So there are no united voices even within Palestinian movement. And as the Ambassador just mentioned, the Arab world also lately has been inclined towards engaging Israel. And several countries, including India, have sort of tapered off that original or old enthusiasm of 70s and 80s in pushing the Palestinian cause. So I noticed that Israel and Netanyahu himself are emerging as extraordinarily privileged in that sense. He's going to become Prime Minister for 5th term this time. And in that sense, I think there is an increasing stature and influence of Israel, which is clear outcome of these elections now. Also the fact that he's even earlier, but this time also used the plank of national security, projecting himself as an individual who will be the savior of Israel, protect Israel from internal, external threats, etc. And the whole tone of assertive and almost aggressive tone that is visible now in coming out of elections. And the fact that despite all the charges of corruption and other things that in just a month ago, in February actually, were slapped on him, There is inordinate endorsement of Netanyahu himself and of that assertive, aggressive Israel, I think increasingly becoming acceptable both inside Israel as also in West Asia, in the neighborhood. And I think that kind of Israel is being engaged by India. But I think we'll have discussion on that in the follow-up.
Right. That having been said, Professor Pant, I mean, despite, the corruption allegations, the scandals back home, Benjamin Netanyahu has managed to, to get another term. Of course, he has to try to cobble up some kind of an alliance really before that happens. But are we going to see a Netanyahu who's going to be ultra-right in the near future?
Well, I think the politics of Israel itself has shifted considerably to the right, and I think Mr. Netanyahu himself has been the architect of that policy. If you think of this prime ministership as being the fifth iteration now, you also recognize how far Israel has come in terms of its political evolution, and you also recognize the shift that is happening within the Israeli politics with his election now. Given the context that we are discussing. So I think there has been this dramatic transformation in Israeli politics and society, I would say itself, where there is a considerable emphasis on issues of settlement, on the issues of national security, and on the issue of identity, which I think has always been the case, because Israel, after all, is a Jewish state premised on certain ideational belief system. But I think now that the politics of the country is moving in a direction which, and in no short measure because of Mr. Netanyahu, I think you have to give him credit for having such a weak hand and then coming out victorious in these elections. I think whether or not he becomes even more radical in its approach would depend on what sort of a coalition he engages with and what sort of a regional environment he gets. I think at the moment the situation is that things seem to be going in Israeli favor. So you have an Arab coalition that is largely dysfunctional, that is Arab countries are largely behind Israel. There is no large standing regional compact as far as the two-state solution is concerned. America under Mr. Trump has been so benevolent on a number of issues. So I think he does not feel, why would he feel any need to compromise? In my sense is that he would be taking a standard line that he has taken throughout these elections.
Because it has worked for him.
It has worked for him, and that is something that he feels would propel his opponents also in a direction which is where he is more comfortable, rather than fighting in a terrain which is opposition's terrain.
Right. So he's driving the agenda really, and he would like to keep it that way for his own benefit. Yes, that having been said, Ambassador, taking the discussion forward now, what are the implications? What does it mean really, the election result for the region as a whole?
Well, firstly, we have to keep in mind that the Arabs are totally divided. Saudis are very keen somehow to block the advance of Iran into the countries closer to Saudi Arabia. And Israel also, as just now our friend said, that look, the identity issue is so important to them that they will go all out to make sure that Iran does not get any headway. They might come to some agreements with the Palestinians so that they are kept out of the Iranian influence. So that is likely that on one hand the Americans are saying that they will come up with some grand solution for Palestine. Now what will be that grand solution? The two-state formula, I think they would like to dump and see what will be the reaction in the Arab world, and then come up with some idea and give a lot of money for the economic betterment of the Palestinian people, so that if they do not get total sovereignty over the areas on which they are working, at least they get a lot of job opportunities and economic investments. So I think this seems to be the scenario which is building up. And then, as we have just discussed, that Netanyahu is under also investigations for various corruption charges, and they might come to a head in the next couple of months. So at that stage, we'll have to see as to what will be the stand of the other political parties, whether they will continue to support him or they will start putting pressure on him and start asking for a bigger say in the running of the country. So therefore, these are the issues which we have to keep in mind, that the external factors, the question of a likely solution to Palestinian issue, and then what will happen within Israel because of the corruption charges which are there.
Professor, so challenging times ahead really as far as Benjamin Netanyahu is concerned, or is it going to be easy sailing for him?
There are challenges, of course, as Ambassador just mentioned, that corruption charges on him are not over. They will be pursued in coming months. But I think this endorsement is important, that he's been brought back. And the fact that all the ultra-right Orthodox parties are willing to work with the Likud party and take him as their leader. He has challenges, but I don't think they are going to be kind of unsettling his agenda in that sense. If you remember, he's already announced he's going to annex the West Bank, Golan Heights. Sorry.
Golan Heights, yeah.
So that I think is something that might again push his nationalist agenda forward and create a national mood which will make these issues like corruption charges look like, smaller marginal issues. So the fact that his plank increasingly is national security even expansion of Israeli state in that sense, that is kind of creating a kind of emotional kind of support for him on the ground. And then, of course, as Professor Pant just mentioned, the benevolence of United States. And I think that is, other than his domestic endorsement, is his biggest support, biggest strength. The fact that Trump had already shifted the embassy to Jerusalem, he's been critical of United Nations Security Council anti-Israel resolutions. He's also, supporting his aggressive policies in Golan Heights, all sorts of things. So I think that enormous support for Netanyahu as an individual and his national security agenda will make him overcome several of these challenges, in my understanding, and I think that will keep him in grip of his national situation.
Sure. Professor Pant, so are we going to see a stronger bond, a stronger partnership now between President Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu going forward? And what is likely to happen in the region as a whole, because it's a volatile region at the end of the day?
Yes, I think that's very likely that Mr. Netanyahu would endorse Mr. Trump even more substantively now going forward, given the kind of endorsement that he received during his election campaign from Mr. Trump. So, and on critical issues where there is such a debate, and Mr. Trump really went out of his way to almost make a case to his opponents that, look, I stand solidly behind him. So I think he would certainly would like to support Mr. Trump's agenda now. And if that agenda, I think, as the ambassador talked about, involves some form of negotiations with the Palestinians, I think it would be very difficult to say no to him. Also, I think the fact that America at this point has interesting relationship with MBS, with the Saudi Crown Prince, who has been under a lot of strain, and America has been the last country almost standing in the Western world behind the Saudi Prince, I think also makes it very likely that certain things may come out of this trilateral engagement, because there are these three important actors who can jostle and who can make this work, the Palestinian question, go in certain directions. So I think these are going to be interesting times, and I have no doubt that the relationship between Tel Aviv and Washington is going to only be stronger because of what has happened in the elections. And I think Mr. Netanyahu would also be under some, would also respect what Mr. Trump has done for him in terms of reaching out to him in this term of his, and making sure that, I think, the agendas, if they not, if they don't complement, they at least don't diverge in a manner that creates problems for both countries individually. So I do see a lot of convergence going forward. Whether or not it bears fruit in terms of a strong deal, for example, on the Palestinian question, it still remains open.
Right. Okay, let's talk about the India angle now. Ambassador, what does it mean for India really? Let's not forget we have elections in India as well. So we're going to have a new government in India in about a month and a week's time. So how is all of this going to play out?
Whoever comes out on top in the Indian elections will have to make sure that the special relations which have developed between India and Israel are carried forward. Even if there are some, let's say, Palestinian sympathizers in the future government, they will have to keep in mind that when Pakistan attacked us in Pulwama, it was really the Israeli support which was helpful when we took counter-action on Balakot. And I think the spice missiles which are being talked about are a kind of an exchange with the Israelis. And otherwise also Israelis have helped very much on the defense side, the Indian government. So therefore we have to keep in mind that the relations have moved quite a bit from what we were having earlier. At the same time, Israelis would like India's support to find a solution on the West Asian scenario, because India has great amount of goodwill among the West Asian countries. As you saw that the UAE recently gave the highest award, Zayed Award, to our Prime Minister. And the same way, I think most of the Arab countries are trying to befriend India. We have also seen that the Russians have also given one of their highest awards to the Indian Prime Minister. So which means that the situation is in favor of India, whatever leadership comes to power. Because now Chinese have been pushing their agenda so strongly that there is a feeling that enough is enough. China should be put under some restraint, and China is supporting Pakistan in a way which is giving irresponsible behavior a kind of a green signal from the Chinese side. So I'm quite sure that the Israelis will not like to see that. They would like to strengthen India's hand, and other European countries and other countries also would go in that direction. Though I must say that Europe right now, because they have very large number of refugees in their own territories, and they don't want to support what President Trump is doing along with Netanyahu. So they are saying that no, these West Bank settlements and the Golan Heights settlements, etc., need to be thought through more carefully, because there are UN resolutions, there are international commitments, there is a two-state formula which is agreed upon. So unless something new comes up, and that India will also have to keep in mind, because India has a very large segment of population which have always given full support to the UN resolutions in the past. So if there is a change, then President Trump and Israel will have to come up with some solution which is acceptable to the Arab countries also in the region.
Right. You know, Professor Soran Singh, Israeli-India relationships have reached a new height really over the last few years, and we've noticed that, we've witnessed that as well. How do we keep that trajectory going?
That's right. The tweet actually from Indian Prime Minister to Netanyahu was to say that we treat you as a great friend of India, and with you I look forward to taking bilateral relations to the new heights, as you just mentioned. I think it is interesting to note that despite for several decades relations with Israel staying under wraps for obvious reasons, that we had a domestic population, we had a certain public posturing towards Arab states, Palestinian cause. Across party lines, there have been support for building close relations with Israel. From Narasimha Rao to Deve Gowda to Prime Minister Manmohan Singh to now Prime Minister Modi. In fact, you could go back now stories about 1960s when Mrs. Gandhi, you remember 69 is the time when RAW and Mossad start working together. And that is in the context of Pakistan being the largest Muslim state on the planet at that time. Enormous influence in OIC being completely anti-India, is where the relationship begins. So it's been several decades, almost half a century of relationship, where across party lines there have been constant incremental growth of that relationship happening, leading to now Israel being the second most important defense partner of India after Russia, and enormous intelligence cooperation, but now expanding that limited cooperation to several other areas, from education to science and technology to R&D to trade, development, commerce, connectivity. And that broad basing of relationship, I think, is the new thing which we are now noticing, because relationship has come out in open. And that is what I think increases both the possibilities of taking it forward in an enormous manner. The trade, for example, we've been talking from 2013 to double it to $10 billion, has not kind of shown that traction so far. Should be an area to focus much more. But several very niche areas, like, there are centers of excellence that Israel has opened, cooperation in agriculture, water harvesting. There are very niche areas where Israel stands out as a one unique partner of India. And the fact that we are expanding it to enormous amount of new sectors now would give it a very different kind of a shape. And I think that has also some connection to the larger global geopolitics in terms of the way we have come closer to United States, and all the friends and allies of United States are working together with us. And so the mention of Saudi Arabia, for example, was made here. And the fact that Indian flights go over, for example, Oman and Saudi Arabia, and I'm told this is the only exception, where they are allowing international flights to reach Tel Aviv using their airspace. So I think there's a whole new kind of environment which is evolving, which would give enormous opportunity for these two relationships to grow forward. And to me, it doesn't matter who comes to power in New Delhi, because this is a relationship which is moving forward. And only the acceleration could change depending on who sits in New Delhi.
Right. Professor Pant, so what areas of the relationship need special attention, do you think?
Well, I think, the one area where perhaps India can learn a lot and India can take advantage of the ecosystem that Israel has built is the startup ecosystem that Israelis have built for themselves. Now, here is a country with very limited natural resources, and so they have been able to harness those human resources in a manner that has given them this technological advantage over their peers, which is quite extraordinary. And I think that is it's called Startup Nation for a reason. So I would hope that that's something, as we build our startup ecosystem, and this has been one of the priorities in the last few years, as we move forward with that agenda, I think that area perhaps can become the focal point for us to engage Israel on, because that's one country where there are no political issues around technology, with which there is a comfort level now at a political level where you can take these conversations without worrying about the larger political fallout. And I think that is something that we should be engaging more substantively. It would also do something fundamental to this relationship. It would bring in stakeholders into this relationship that have been otherwise absent. So largely, if you talk of political issues, you talk of, oh, we have so many Muslim population in this country, or we have those who have certain worldview about Palestinians. So those have traditionally dominated the discourse. I think if you want to take the discourse out of this to a more pragmatic, practical issues, you have to bring in economics, trade and technology to the forefront of this discussion. And if you can do that, you bring in new stakeholders which can then propel this, which will make sure that the relationship goes on an autopilot.
Right.
Then you don't really have to worry about changes in government, changes in leadership, etc., etc. And I'm very hopeful that that's beginning to happen. But I think that's something where perhaps we can now focus on as the new government takes seat in Delhi and as there is a new government in Tel Aviv.
All right. Quick closing comments now from all my guests on the best way forward for Indo-Israeli ties, starting first with the Ambassador.
Well, I think the present Prime Minister Narendra Modi has already made a very positive statement about Netanyahu's election, and so he's really looking forward to taking the relationship forward. So I think if that happens after the Indian elections, I'm quite sure that India and Israel relations will be seeing very, very high levels of cooperation. And of course, it will also take into account the traditional views which India has about the West Asian situation, which is respected by most of those countries themselves. In case there is a change of leadership in India, then also, as we have discussed that in the past also, there is a gradual building up of these ties, and we'll have to keep in mind our own strategic interests and our relations, while keeping in mind the interests of the different communities within India, that they are also kept fully informed as to what India is doing.
Right. Professor?
I think in international relations, especially among major nations, personal chemistry of leaders has become enormously important. And the fact that both are starting innings on both sides, New Delhi's leader and the leader in Tel Aviv will start innings at same time, would give them an understanding of working together for next 5 years in that sense. So that should be a clear advantage of the fact that elections are happening at same time and two leaders are going to come up in two of these countries. What is particularly noticeable complementarity in two? Israel has done wonderful achievements in some of the niche areas, technology-oriented niche areas, and India has an enormous market to consume and use those. So they have attraction towards us in terms of massification of implementing these experiments that they've been carrying at a smaller scale. For India, it's a reliable partner who can deliver technology to us, as Professor Pant said, without too much political wavering one side or the other. So I think there's a certain amount of visible complementarity which should be also very helpful in next 5 years as they work together as two leaders coming out of these elections.
Right. Professor Pant?
Well, I think it's a very interesting time in West Asian politics, and I think India's footprint is growing in that part of the world. So one would hope that as a new government takes power in Delhi and as new government has taken power in Tel Aviv, I think we will be able to move forward with an agenda that is not only rooted in our bilateral needs, but also somewhat takes into account the regional environment that we are witnessing, where India's footprint, as we have already discussed, is expanding, and where the need for India to be a major stakeholder in the kind of balance of power that is evolving would become more and more prominent.
Right.
So if you have two leaders in India and Israel who have similar vision about the region, I think that makes the task much more easier.
All right. On that note, then, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of India's World. I'd like to thank all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. We'd like to hear from you as well. Do share your feedback with us. Our email ID is indiasworld.feedback@gmail.com. You can also tweet to us using our Twitter handles at FRP09 and at Rajya Sabha TV. That's it from me. See you again next time.